Kiss me goodbye and write me while I'm gone. Goodbye, my sweetheart. Hello, Vietnam.
In order to understand the causes of the Vietnam War, we must first take a brief look at Vietnam's colonial past. Since the 1800s, France had control of Vietnam, and this was called French Indochina. During World War II, the Japanese had taken control of Vietnam. After Japan surrendered, the French regained control of Vietnam. With all of this, there was an instability in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese had no intention of being subjugated anymore. So in 1945, the French faced Vietnamese resistance to their authority. The French were backed by the United States and wished to re-seize control over its longtime colonial possession in Southeast Asia. In Vietnam, a new group called the Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh, was a group of Vietnamese freedom fighters, whose goal was an independent Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, who was a pro-communist, was supported by China and the Soviet Union in their effort to promote communism around the world.
By 1950, the United States was aiding the French with money and military supplies in order to fight the Viet Minh. Trying to avoid sending U.S. troops directly into the conflict, the United States relied on France to fight off the Viet Minh and contain communism in Vietnam. In 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower introduces the Domino Theory in order to justify United States involvement in the conflict. Eisenhower explained that countries on the brink of communism in Southeast Asia would all eventually fall to communism if the United States failed to contain it from the start.
$400 million to help that war. We're not voting for a giveaway program. We're voting for the cheapest way that we can prevent the occurrence of something that would be of the most terrible significance to the United States of America.
To Eisenhower, Vietnam was the first domino, and if it were to fall to communism, all other poor countries in the region would also eventually fall. The best way to contain communism in Southeast Asia then was to ensure that Vietnam didn't fall to communism. But by 1954, American aid had failed, and the French surrendered the country of Vietnam to the communists at their outpost at Dien Bien Phu. Ho Chi Minh's communists controlled the entire northern region of Vietnam.
With increased United States aid, Vietnam plunged into a bloody civil war. In 1952, world powers convened to discuss Vietnam at the Geneva Accords. Divided along the 17th parallel, two separate countries developed. South Vietnam was a democratic republic, and its capital was Saigon. South Vietnam was led by Ngo Dien Diem and backed by the United States. North Vietnam was a communist state, and its capital was Hanoi, led by Ho Chi Minh. North Vietnam was backed by the Soviet Union and China. At Geneva, all sides agreed that free elections would be held to unify Vietnam. However, sensing the communists would win, Diem cancels the elections in 1956 in an attempt to keep his power.
Diem's government in South Vietnam was very corrupt. It was more interested in suppressing opposition to his government, silencing his critics, and pocketing funds from the United States instead of using them to fight off communism. One of Diem's largest critics were the Buddhists who live in South Vietnam. Opposed to his opposition of their religion, Diem persecuted and oppressed the Buddhist faith. And in protest, Buddhist monks set themselves on fire and burned to death in the streets of South Vietnam. Americans were horrified by these images and confused as to how we could support a government that could make people do such things. By November of 1963, aware that Diem was too corrupt to contain the communist North, the United States secretly had Diem assassinated by the CIA.
Finally, after all of this, the Vietnam War becomes Americanized. The United States had backed Diem, hoping to install a democratic government. Once he was removed, the United States continued to advance their agenda. However, each regime after Diem was more and more corrupt and incompetent of ruling the country. It soon became evident that the United States would have to directly fight the North itself. August 2nd of 1964, a North Vietnamese patrol boat fires on the USS Maddox. This led to U.S. airstrikes in North Vietnam and gave LBJ a reason to send troops.
My fellow Americans, as President and Commander-in-Chief, it is my duty to the American people to report that renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
August 7th of 1964, Congress approves the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. This was not a declaration of war, but the resolution gave LBJ unchecked military authority. Johnson could use military force as he saw fit in Vietnam without votes or approval. The goal of the resolution was to give Johnson the ability to use military power as he saw fit in order to help the United States win the war. The problem is that this is an abuse of executive power because Congress is the branch of the government that is to declare war. The president is now stepping over Congress and taking powers that are not given to him in the Constitution. This sets a dangerous precedent for the future of the United States.